You know the rhyme. You picture the fragile egg, the high wall, the clumsy fall. It is a harmless tune that has echoed through nurseries for over 200 years, but beneath that childish veneer lies a disturbing reality that history has actively tried to bury. Let's get the lie out of the way immediately. Humpty Dumpty was never an egg, and despite what you may have read on the internet, he wasn't a Civil War canon either. Those are comfortable fabrications, fairy tales invented to sanitize a much uglier truth. The original rhyme wasn't a riddle for children, it was a coded warning for adults. It isn't a story about a shell cracking. It is a story about the absolute, terrifying helplessness of human effort. It explores the darkest fundamental rule of existence, that some things and some people can be broken in a way that can never be fixed. To find the real Humpty Dumpty, we have to strip away the cartoon shell. We have to leave the nursery and descend into the grimy, gin-soaked gutters of Restoration London. Because the true horror story doesn't begin with a fall, it begins with a bottle. To understand the origins of the rhyme, you must first understand the world that birthed it. Forget the sanitized, cobblestoned quaintness of period dramas. The London of the late 17th century, Restoration London, was a city rebuilding on top of its own filth following plague and fire. It was a place of stark, brutal contrasts. And nowhere was this brutality more evident than in its taverns. These weren't cosy public houses. In the seedier districts near the docks or the winding alleys of Eastcheap, taverns were subterranean dens that smelled of unwashed bodies, damp wool, cheap tobacco smoke, and the sour reek of stale beer soaking into sawdust floors. They were crowded, dangerous places where sailors, labourers, and the city's destitute sought oblivion as cheaply and quickly as possible. And the quickest route to oblivion in the late 1690 seconds was a specific, potent concoction. If you were a patron with only a few copper coins and a desperate need to forget your miserable existence, you didn't order fine wine. You approached the barkeep and demanded a Humpty Dumpty. Long before it was a character, Humpty Dumpty was a drink. Contemporary accounts describe it as a toxic stew. It was a crude mixture of ale boiled with cheap, fiery brandy. It was served scalding hot. The heat intensified the alcohol's vapor, hitting the drinker with a dizzying rush before the liquid even reached their stomach. It was designed for maximum impact, a brutal, blunt instrument of intoxication. This wasn't social drinking. This was industrial-scale self-destruction. The patrons would down the boiling mixture in desperate gulps, their throats burning, their eyes watering from the fumes. The effect was immediate and devastating. Within minutes, faces would flush crimson as bellies churned with the hot, toxic brew. The brilliance and the horror of the name lies in its crude simplicity. In the vernacular of the 1600s, the name was a literal description of the physiological consequences of consuming the drink. Think of the physical action of extreme nausea. By the second or third round of this boiling poison, a man wouldn't be standing upright. He would be humped over, hunched, retching, his body contorted in an effort to expel the toxin. And inevitably, once the alcohol completely severed the connection between brain and muscle, he would be dumped. He would collapse into the gutter outside or onto the ale-stained floor beneath the table, a dead weight, utterly incapacitated. He was humped, then he was dumped. The drink was named for the wreckage it created. This isn't folklore. The linguistic connection is undeniable and documented. The Oxford English Dictionary, the definitive record of the language, confirms this etymological origin. It records the earliest known usage of the term, specifically referencing this potent, brandy-laced boiled ale. The nursery rhyme character we know today was born in the bottom of a tankard. But language is a living thing, and it evolves to reflect the anxieties of its time. As the 17th century bled into the 18th, the term shifted. By the early 1700s, Humpty Dumpty was no longer just slang for the drink itself. It had evolved into a derogatory term for the kind of person who consumed it. It became slang for a short, squat, clumsy drunkard. But banish the image of a jolly, red-cheeked Falstaff. The reality was far grimmer. A Humpty Dumpty was a person whose body had been ravaged by cheap alcohol. They were bloated from liver failure, squat from poor nutrition, clumsy because their nervous systems were corroded by decades of vice. These were the broken souls you'd find slumped against tavern walls in the seediest parts of London at dawn. Men whose lives had been so thoroughly destroyed that they had become fixtures of the street, as much a part of the urban landscape as the cobblestones they passed out on. They were the cautionary tales that parents would point to, the living ghosts haunting the city's underbelly. They had fallen into the bottle and hadn't crawled back out. And it was these men, these real, tragic human wrecks, who inspired the earliest known printed version of the rhyme. When you read those original lyrics, stripped of later edits, it becomes horrifyingly clear that the Great Fall was never about gravity. It was about a different kind of collapse entirely. Fast forward a century. The term Humpty Dumpty has cemented itself in the lexicon of the London streets. It is 1797. The very first printed version of the rhyme appears in a collection titled Juvenile Amusements, and if you are expecting the version you learned in kindergarten, prepare to be disoriented. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. 80 men and 80 more could not make Humpty Dumpty where he was before. Read that again. Look at what is missing. There are no horses. There is no king. There is no royal cavalry rushing to the rescue. This isn't a state emergency. It is a neighbourhood tragedy. Instead, we have 80 men and 80 more. A score is 20. So the rhyme describes a crowd of 160 men, 160 people gathering around a single fallen figure. Why? To understand the horror of this image, you have to visualize the scene as a contemporary Londoner would have. The wall wasn't a castle fortification. Drunks don't climb battlements. The wall was likely a tavern bench or a low stone barrier, a perch where the intoxicated would sit to catch the air when the heat of the taproom became too much. It was a place to watch the world spin by before the inevitable collapse. When the fall happens, it isn't dramatic. It's just sad. A heavy, clumsy tumble into the filth. But then, the rhyme tells us, the men come, 80 and 80 more. Imagine the scene. A crowd gathers around the collapsed figure. These are his neighbours, his drinking companions, perhaps even his family. One man grabs his shoulders. Another takes his feet. They try to hoist him up. But if you have ever tried to lift a person who is completely dead weight, someone whose consciousness has been utterly extinguished by alcohol, you know the physics change. The body becomes unmanageable. It is fluid, heavy, resisting every attempt at order. More men join in. 10, 20, 50. Soon, the entire neighbourhood has assembled. 160 strong. It is a spectacle of futility. They are all pulling, lifting, and straining. But his body remains as limp as wet cloth. His head lolls back, eyes rolled up to show only the whites. His breathing is shallow and rattling. They can prop him up momentarily, get him to his knees, maybe even upright against the wall, but the second they let go, gravity reclaims him. He collapses again like a sack of grain. The horror of the rhyme isn't that he's broken into pieces. It's that he is still whole, yet completely destroyed. The line "could not make Humpty Dumpty where he was before" is chillingly specific. It doesn't say they couldn't put him together. It says they couldn't make him where he was. They couldn't restore his status. They couldn't restore his humanity. The more they try, the clearer the terrible truth becomes. This isn't just a man who has tripped. This is a man beyond all human help, destroyed so completely by his vice that no amount of community effort, not even 160 strong men, can restore him to dignity. It is a portrait of a community realizing that one of their own is gone, even though he is still breathing right in front of them. This fear, the fear of the irreversible fall, wasn't unique to England. Across Europe, different cultures developed their own variations of this nightmare, each capturing the same essential horror, though often with more visceral imagery. In Denmark, children sing of Lille Trill, a chubby boy who tumbles down a hillside. But in the original Danish phrasing, the story is darker than it sounds. Lille Trill doesn't just bruise his knees. The lyrics suggest he splits open, like overripe fruit. The rhyme describes the other children watching. They don't help him. They stand in a circle, singing, as if his destruction were entertainment. The rhyme ends with his insides spilling out like dough, while the other children count the pieces. It's a grotesque lesson in fragility. Travel to Germany, and you find Humpelken Pumpelken. The name itself mimics the sound of something round and heavy bouncing downstairs, thump, thump, thump. In the Rhineland version of this tale, the character sits not on a wall, but on a church steeple during a wedding. When the bells ring, the vibration shakes him loose. He plummets through the celebration below, splattering across the white dress of the bride. The congregation kneels around the stain, praying. But the rhyme tells us their prayers are useless. The prayers can't undo what gravity has done. The wedding becomes a funeral. The white dress stays red. While these European cousins share the archetypal theme of physical destruction, the English Humpty Dumpty stands apart. The European versions are mythical, almost fairy tale tragedies. But the British version, it is grounded in the specific, suffocating reality of alcoholic degradation. Other cultures imagined mythical falls. England encoded the all-too-real collapse of men destroyed by the gin craze and the alehouse. It was a social commentary on the human wreckage of industrial-scale drinking. But a story about a drunkard dying in a gutter is hard to sell to children generation after generation. The rhyme was too dark, too real. It needed a mask. And by the early 1800s, society found the perfect one. The morbid specificity of alcoholic destruction proved so effective at describing something utterly broken that people began using it as a puzzle. What sits on a wall has a great fall and cannot be put back together again. If you divorce the question from its grim origins, the answer becomes obvious. It isn't a drunkard, it's an egg. And with that simple shift, the tragedy of a lost soul was about to be transformed into the most famous riddle in the English language, and eventually, a weapon of political warfare. The transformation was subtle at first. By 1810, the rhyme appeared in a collection called Gammer Gurton's Garland. Here, for the first time in print, the broken man is gone. In his place sits the egg. It makes a certain kind of sense. The riddle format required an answer that was universally understood. Humpty Dumpty had lost its specific connection to the boiled ale of the 1600s, and the memory of the specific drunkards of the 1700s was fading. But the concept, something fragile, precarious, and irrevocably broken, remained. The egg became the perfect visual metaphor. It stripped away the messy social commentary on alcoholism and left only the pure mechanics of destruction. Children who recited it had no idea they were echoing a cautionary tale about the limits of human salvation. They just saw a funny foodstuff falling down. But here is where the story takes its sharpest, most unexpected turn. If you look closely at that 1810 version, the one that introduced the egg, you will notice something crucial is still missing. The most famous lines in the entire rhyme are nowhere to be found. There are no horses, there are no king's men. Even after the egg appeared, the rhyme was still about a neighborhood failing to save one of their own. The famous military element, the king's cavalry charging in to save the day, wasn't folklore. It was a political graft. It was artificially stitched onto the rhyme around 1813, over 15 years after the first documented printing. And the proof of this incision comes from an unexpected source: British parliamentary records. Picture Westminster Hall on a grey March afternoon in 1813. The air is stale, not with pipe smoke, but with the tension of an empire in crisis. The chamber echoes with heated debate about the catastrophic state of British colonial policy in India. The topic at hand is the East India Company. Once the jewel of British commerce, it has become a bloated, corrupt, unmanageable monster. Its mismanagement has created famine and revolt in the subcontinent. Its military expenses are hemorrhaging the Crown's treasury. The Indian question is the Vietnam War of its day, a quagmire that no amount of money or soldiers seems able to fix. Then, a member of Parliament rises. The records suggest it may have been someone like Henry Brougham, a man known for his cutting wit and rhetorical flourishes. His voice booms across the hushed assembly. He needs a metaphor to describe the sheer incompetence of the Crown's intervention in India. He needs something that sounds innocent but carries a poisonous bite. He reaches into the nursery, grabs the riddle of the broken egg, and weaponizes it. Gentlemen, he might have said, our situation in the subcontinent reminds me of a children's riddle. All the kings, horses, and all the king's men cannot put our Indian policy together again. A ripple of nervous laughter spreads through the chamber. Some members shift uncomfortably in their seats, because they understand exactly what has just happened. The nursery rhyme has just been rewritten in real time. By changing fourscore men, the community, to the king's men, the state, the meaning of the rhyme flips upside down. It is no longer a tragedy about a man who cannot be saved. It is now a biting satire about a government that is too incompetent to save anything. This wasn't an accident. It was a subversive commentary on state failure. The message became radical. If the king's own resources, his military might, his cavalry, his loyal servants, couldn't fix this simple problem, what did that say about royal competence? Why send horses to fix an egg? Why send cavalry to fix a broken man? You wouldn't. It's absurd. And that was the point. The addition of the horses highlighted the stupidity of the government's response to the crisis. It was a way of saying, you are throwing resources at a problem you do not understand and cannot fix. The evidence becomes even more damning when you trace what happened next. The rhyme didn't stop evolving. It continued to be used as a political template for whatever crisis was gripping the nation. In 1835, yet another version appeared in print. This time, the lyrics declared, not all the king's money, nor all the king's men, could solve the problem. The critique had expanded from military failure to economic impotence. The rhyme had become a palimpsest, a manuscript where the original writing has been effaced to make room for later writing, but traces of the old remain. Each revision didn't hide the past. It layered new meaning on top, creating a stack of anxieties. Layer 1. The alcoholic destruction of the 1600s. Layer 2. The existential fragility of the egg in 1810. Layer 3. The political incompetence of the state in 1813. Once you understand this process of cultural layering, this habit of rewriting the rhyme to suit the politics of the day, the popular historical theories you see on the internet begin to crumble. They reveal themselves not as ancient truths, but as modern fabrications. And there is no fabrication more persistent, more elaborate, or more completely false than the story of the Canon of Colchester. You've probably heard it. You've probably repeated it. Humpty Dumpty was a cannon used in the Civil War. It's a great story. It has action, explosions, and history. But it is a lie. And in the next minute, I'm going to prove it. If you type Humpty Dumpty origin into Google right now, you will almost certainly be told the story of the Great Siege of Colchester during the English Civil War. It is a narrative so detailed, so cinematic, and so perfectly aligned with the rhyme that it feels impossible to doubt. The legend goes like this. In the summer of 1648, royalist forces were defending the town of Colchester against the parliamentarian army. To hold the line, they hoisted a massive cannon to the top of the tower of Street Mary at the walled church. The defenders christened this bronze monster Humpty Dumpty, perhaps for its short, squat shape, or the way it teetered precariously on the church battlements. For weeks, Humpty Dumpty thundered death upon the enemy below. It was the royalists' ace in the hole, keeping the parliamentarian forces at bay, until the fateful day. A parliamentarian gunner, often described in local folklore as One-Eyed Thompson, aimed his own cannon not at the gun, but at the church tower beneath it. The shot was perfect. The masonry exploded. The great cannon tilted, lost its balance, and tumbled from the roof. It crashed into the marshland below with an earth-shaking thud, burying itself deep in the mud and rubble. The royalists were desperate. They needed that gun. They sent out teams with ropes and levers to retrieve it. But the cannon was too heavy, the mud too deep, and the machinery too broken. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty together again. It's a masterpiece of storytelling. It transforms a nonsensical nursery rhyme into a coded piece of military history. It explains the wall, the fall, and the king's men, It turns a child's song into a war memorial. There is just one problem. It's completely made up. The defenders of this theory ignore a fatal, unresolvable chronological flaw. The canon legend depends entirely on the line, "all the king's horses and all the king's men," for its narrative to make sense. Without that line, it's just a story about a broken gun. But as we just established in the previous section, that line didn't exist in 1648. The siege happened 165 years before the king's men were added to the rhyme. The royalists in Colchester wouldn't have been singing about king's horses failing to fix a cannon, because that version of the rhyme wouldn't be invented until the Napoleonic Wars. It is a chronological impossibility. It's like claiming that Shakespeare wrote the script for the Avengers. The math simply doesn't work. Just take my word for it. The Victoria County History of Essex, the definitive academic record of the region, conducted an exhaustive search of contemporary accounts. They looked at military diaries, siege maps, and local letters from 1648. Their conclusion was brutal and formal. There is no evidence to support the suggestion of any connection between the siege and the nursery rhyme. So where did this story come from? It wasn't passed down through generations of soldiers. It was invented, almost out of thin air, in the late 20th century. Historical detectives have traced the canon theory back to a speculative article written around 1996 for a local magazine, which was then picked up by a tourism board and finally exploded onto the early internet. It is a modern myth designed to make a boring church history more exciting for tourists, and this pattern repeats with every secret history you hear about Humpty Dumpty. Take the theory about King Richard III. People claim the rhyme is about his defeat at Bosworth Field in 1485. They say Humpty Dumpty was a nickname for his hunchback, and the wall was his horse, White Surrey. It sounds clever. But again, look at the timeline. Richard died in 1485. The King's Men line appears in 1813. That is a 328-year gap. Are we really supposed to believe that a secret coded message about a dead king survived for 3 centuries without ever being written down, only to surface in a children's book during the Industrial Revolution? These theories, the canon, the king, the siege engines, are seductive. We want them to be true. We want the rhyme to be about battles and kings because that feels significant. It feels grand. But these theories don't just add to the story. They actively bury the truth. They are cultural debris that has piled up over the centuries, obscuring the original darker meaning. The reality isn't about a bronze cannon heroically falling in battle. It isn't about a king fighting for his crown. It is about a drunk man, smelling of vomit and gin, dying in a gutter while his neighbours watch, helpless to stop it. We invented the canon because the drunkard was too depressing. We invented the mystery to distract ourselves from the tragedy. But here is the irony. In stripping away the specific history of the drunkard and replacing him with an egg, the rhyme accidentally stumbled back onto an ancient, philosophical truth. The canon theory tries to make the rhyme about military failure, but the egg makes it about existential failure. The canon can be recast. Iron can be melted down and forged again. A king can be succeeded by another king. Those things are fixable. But an egg? Once an egg breaks, that is the end of the line. There is no unbreaking it. It either transforms into something else, or it rots. And that brings us to the final, uncomfortable realization. The rhyme has survived for 300 years, not because of a secret war story, but because it whispers a fear that we all share. We aren't afraid of cannons. We are afraid of entropy. We are afraid of the moment when we fall, and we realize that no amount of power, money, or king's men can put us back together. In the end, we circle back to the egg. While it was a later addition, a sanitization of the drunkard reality, it is, paradoxically, the most honest version of the story. The canon theory tries to give the fall a military meaning. The drunkard theory gives it a social meaning. But the egg gives it a universal meaning. The rhyme endures not because of secret history, but because it speaks to a primal fear that we all understand instinctively. We are all Humpty Dumpty, perched precariously on a wall. We see this truth everywhere, a reputation shattered by a single scandal, a mind broken by sudden trauma, a moment of trust lost to betrayal. The chilling lesson of the rhyme is that authority is an illusion. The king's horses and king's men represent the ultimate power of the state, the best resources money can buy, the strongest forces available. And yet, against the simple physics of a fall, they are powerless. No amount of funding, no army, and no royal decree can unbreak an egg. Some damage is simply permanent. History is filled with these coded warning stories we think we know, but have forgotten how to hear. If you want to help us excavate the truth beneath the fairy tales and find the reality hidden in the nursery, click that subscribe button. There are many more walls to look behind. Restoration is a lie. The king's horses aren't coming to save us. They never could.